Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to Korean Atlanta Mentorship. In this video, we're going to review a little portion of a documentary from PBS called The Fall of Fujimori. And I think this is a very interesting documentary about how a Japanese Peruvian got elected as the president in the early 90s and some lessons we can take from that from a marketing and business perspective. So I saw this a long time ago. I think, yeah, so this is from 2005. And I thought it was really strange how in the Asian American crowd, I never heard of this guy, right? But I only saw it because, back in the day, like I somehow found it on YouTube and I was just like, wow, this is really interesting. So this Japanese guy became president of Peru, and what can we learn not just from people in the United States? It doesn't matter where you're from, whether you're from El Salvador, Peru, Australia. What can we learn from other people if they've done things that I don't think that in my mind are like kind of mind blowing, right? So we're gonna examine some parts of the documentary in terms of business and marketing and getting yourself, let's say, your message and product to the masses. So, if you ever want to watch the documentary, it is on YouTube, but it's not on PBS's YouTube channel anymore or the full version. So you kind of have to watch it on other channels. They have subtitles in Spanish. I don't think they have subtitles in English, or maybe you used YouTube auto-generated ones. But it's a really interesting documentary. It's about 1 hour 30 minutes. But I'm just going to go over the kind of the very beginning. So I know he went to jail for political corruption and all that stuff, and he recently got released. But let's not talk about that. Let's just talk about business and marketing. Okay, so if I take a look here, I'll show you some screenshots, and here we have the phrase "Chino Presidente." So Chino is Chinese. But this word is obviously for president. So Chinese president. Now I get like, especially back in the day, nobody knew the difference. Even in the United States, nobody really knew the difference between the Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, right? Like nobody knew the difference. But in Latin America, Chino is kind of like a what's it called? A general term for all Asians in general. So even if somebody says you're Chinese, it also means you're Japanese or Korean. Um, but nowadays they kind of know more of the difference because I talk to them. I deal with a lot of a good number of people from Latin America. All right, so Fall of Fujimori documentary 2005. Look it up on YouTube, and if you see kind of the context of when he decided to become president, well, there's kind of three key points or main points that was happening in the late 80s in Peru, right? So number one is billions of dollars of cocaine exports, right? $1 billion every year. So probably went to Miami or something like that, right? That's probably why they made all those shows back in the 80s about like Miami and stopping crime. I forget what was that show. It's totally skipping my mind. 7,600% hyperinflation. So, people freak out about inflation in the United States. And yeah, I go to a grocery store and then, I buy a couple items. Somehow it's $100. But it kind of doesn't worry me because, like, if people somehow survive 7,600% hyperinflation, I guess, like, yeah, it sucks, but what we have in the United States. But when you see this, like sometimes you feel better about your situation based on comparison. So, and then the last one is the communist insurgent takeover. So I thought this was really interesting because I had never heard from teachers or anything like that. And obviously in high school, you don't study Latin American history about a communist insurgent takeover in the 80s in Peru. And well, I guess in many places in the world, communist insurgent takeovers were happening almost everywhere, right? Well, not the 80s, from like the 50s, after post World War II, but apparently they were about to win. And so um, he in the documentary says, yeah, all these things are happening, and who's going to fix these problems? It would just be the same politicians who have essentially done nothing. So I decided to run for president, And a lot of people say, yeah, he just came out of nowhere, dark horse candidate, right? And so how does, let's say, a person out of nowhere decide to become president, and what does he do uh, for in order to become the president of a nation? So one of the things I want to talk about is his two slogans, right? So a president like you, okay, a president like you. That's a very bold statement, right? Because how many of you would go to a country, and I'm again, I know he's from Peru, right? But how many of you would like go to a country where you don't look like the people and you say, "Hey, I'm just like you," right? That's very. I don't know what the equivalent of that for me would be. Would it be me going to like the rural counties in the South and just say, "Hey, I'm just like you," right? Yeah, I'm just like you. I'm a Southerner just like you, even though I'm not. I'm from California, but maybe that would be the equivalent. And then so his two slogans were this. I don't know if you could see this, but here it says honor, technology, and work. That's the English translations of these three phrases, and a president like you, right? So he would go to the uh, native regions. I think they call them the highlands of Peru, with people who are of indigenous descent, and just campaign there, right? And so I'll just kind of show you some pictures here. So basically, he would wear Japanese man wearing the traditional Peruvian clothing, and look how warmly they're receiving him. And so when I saw this documentary for the first time, a lot of ideas were just like popping up in my head, like about all the possibilities. Like, wow, people will accept this. You know what I mean? Like, wow, I can't, like, huh? And I don't know if you ever felt this way where you felt imposter syndrome because you don't think you're good enough. But this guy, he just wears the traditional Peruvian clothing, and goes out to the rural areas, and look how warmly they are receiving him during his presidential campaign. And so sometimes what happens with people who are they're very high level achievers, they're the ones who experience the imposter syndrome the most because of maybe their insecurities. But a lot of the times, the way that we project ourselves, even if we're not, let's say, 100% what we claim to be, although we're striving to be, that people can will positively receive it more than you think they would, if that makes sense, right? So again, if I'd never seen this documentary and somebody told me, "Oh yeah, just go to a Latin American country, wear the traditional clothing, tell them you're like them, and they might elect you president," I would have been like, "What? That's insane." But this is almost like this is the what I call the Roger Bannister 4 minute mile. So I don't know if you ever heard the story of the Roger Bannister 4 minute mile, but basically, apparently, again, I don't know the whole story. Nobody had ran a 4 minute mile until a guy named Roger Bannister did it. I think in like the 40s or the 50s. And then once he did it, and everybody saw, all the runners saw it was possible, then more people just constantly were able to reach the marker of a 4 minute mile, right? They were able to run a mile in 4 minutes. And so when I see this, or when I saw this a long time ago, deep down back in my head, there was an idea planted that I can connect with people and be nothing like them and tell them I am like them, right? That's a very powerful marketing lesson. That when we try, so it's almost like a form of diplomacy. We can be a diplomat and connect with other people. We don't have to be exactly like them, but people can warmly receive us if we try to reach out, right? That's a very important principle. And I think what happens with a lot of people is that they start at the conclusion. Like, I'll talk about a lot of attitudes I've experienced with Asian Americans. They say, "I can't do this because of X, Y, and Z," and then they never try to reach out, right? Like maybe they'll come up with the conclusion that, "Oh, Southerners are like this, therefore I should never try to be, I don't know, a governor or something in like a Southern state." I know that's kind of a bad analogy, and I've never met people who actually talk like that, but that's just one example, right? And then if we scroll down, I mean, take a look at this picture, the indigenous clothing. right? Taking pictures with the kids. And then, that's a very Kodak moment. I mean, this was in the late 80s, or I think the late 80s, right? 1990 is when he got elected. And if we scroll down, look at all the crowd that, look at the crowd that, that came up to attend his speeches. And if you ever see his speeches, um, and see him speak, um, and take a look at this. I mean, they're all for it, right? Where let me kind of go back here. So, yeah, this is pictures, and then he's like talking in front of them. And let's see if I can hold on a second. I don't like to play videos on this channel just because of the YouTube like copyright and yeah. So he's like making speeches about how in front of all the Peruvians that like, hey, all these politicians that you had, they've just left you a hard life, and he's gonna fix these problems, right? But he's just like you. He's just he's just like you. So it's a very I don't know if ballsy is the right word for the message, but it's a message that most people are unable to pull off because they're a little bit too rational. And this is kind of one of those aha moments where rationality um, actually doesn't help you connect with other people, if that makes sense, right? But again, take a look at these crowds. They're all, I mean, man, I kind of want to, I want, this is crazy. Like, I don't think I've ever seen an Asian American do this in the United States, right? Like, you've never seen an Asian American pull these types of crowds in deep admiration, and he was able to do it just kind of out of nowhere, right? So let's scroll down again, and this here is what they call the uh, Fujimobile, which is basically a tractor, and that was essentially his political campaign of going in a makeshift tractor and going from place to place and introducing himself, right? And then this is when he got interviewed when I think he was in exile in Japan, but I kind of want to highlight this phrase right here, where he's excited because he's talking about how one of the things that was really satisfying to him is hearing the crowds praise him and yelling Chinese president, right? So right here, Chino presidente, que satisfacción. And so this, what joy, what satisfaction. And I thought, wow, that's such a different attitude than what we have in the United States, right? I mean, take a look at this. If we had these pictures in 2024, we'd have activists say, hey, this is cultural appropriation. But this really connected with the people in Peru. And I think one of the reasons is because, like, you're being dances with wolves. If you're the first person doing it, then people kind of see like you're being authentic in the way that you connect with other people, right? Even if it's not, quote, your own, right? But let's scroll down here. And yeah, I mean, and this part I think is a little bit fascinating because, you know, how many Asian Americans do you know? Let's say they're not Chinese, maybe they're Japanese, Korean, and you call them Chinese and they'd be offended, right? You see how the attitudes are different there? Whereas here, it's like, yeah, sure, I love being called Chinese, right? Like Chinese president, how awesome is that? Whereas I think an Asian American would say, what? I'm not Chinese. How dare you? Like you got to know all the differences between the what's it called and I'm Korean and I'm completely different. And I think that comes maybe from a individualistic attitude that you are different from other people, and so you should know the differences between all the individuals. Where maybe in other societies that mentality is not as strong. So let's scroll down here again. So let's just kind of from a marketing and business perspective, what we can learn. So I think the first mind-blowing lesson for me was that this is essentially, and I talked about this a few minutes ago, the Roger Bannister 4-minute mile of political campaigns and connecting with other people. Like you have a guy who looks nothing like the people who he's going to serve or campaigning for, right? Yet he's able to draw an insane crowd, and look how they're just this tells like 1,000 words, right? Look at the smile. Look at people just reaching out to him, and he's just like I think even he is surprised by the reaction that he's getting, right? So, so I think the reason I called this the Roger Bannister 4-minute mile is because I think, let's say from my perspective, I've never seen anybody do this, but this is also an inspiration or one of the inspirations. I'm not saying it's the only one of how I know I could create a YouTube channel called Korean Atlanta Mentorship, and I know it would not appeal to Korean people, right? Like this kind of picture almost summarizes that this is possible. And if I'd never seen that documentary, I think I would have just been a little bit more weary about using that name. But because I see it something like this, I know I could create a YouTube channel called Korean Land to Mentorship and make it successful and have it connect with non-Korean people, right? So let me scroll down. Um, Number two, you have to build emotional bridges with your audience. And I think one of the things that he did very, very well is that basically he talks about how he understands about all the difficulties that the poor were facing. And again, he talks about one of the reasons why he became president is just because of all these problems and hyperinflation, 7,600%, communist takeover, and all that good stuff. And basically, he's basically telling them what they're experiencing, and he's trying to say, "Hey, I'm just like you, and I can resonate with that." And I think storytelling is very powerful, and just even repeating what people say, especially nowadays when it feels like nobody's listening, can be a very powerful connector and bridge, right? And so, um, a lot of the campaign, in my opinion, does not rest in rationality. Like a president like you, and and him telling the people that, and again, this I know this is Spanish, but about how he understands all the difficulties that society has left um, the Peruvian public, right? Very powerful. So let me scroll down here. You have to build emotional bridges with your audience. And the funny thing is, I honestly think his family was rich. That's just what I suspect because I looked at his Wikipedia page, and he did study in the United States for several years, which is why he knows English, right? His English does sound like having a Spanish accent, but he knows English, and I think he studied in France also, right? But but basically, he's going out to the poor and telling them by building that emotional bridge, I'm just like you, and I understand that all the difficulties that you're facing by basically um, summarizing everything that they said. Now, the funny thing is, a lot of people think that in order, like, here's the crazy part. If you ever just explain to people the problem, well, they think 9 times out of 10 you have the solution. So even if you don't have the solution, um, people will want to connect with you. They just assume that you know the solution, even if you don't know it, right? If you can explain the problem well. Now, another thing I kind of want to talk about is that your audience doesn't have to understand you 100% who you are in order to buy into you, right? So I'm pretty sure most of these people are not aware of the difference between Chinese and Japanese. It just seems like it, right? I don't know for sure, but basically, if they're yelling Chinese president to a Japanese man, um, they bought in, but they don't have to 100% know what they bought into, right? So I think one takeaway that we can get from this is that sometimes if we over explain and try to make sure that, let's say, your potential prospects understand every single little thing that you do, that will actually kill your sales more than if you just kind of half explain things, right? So your audiences have to understand 100% who you are and what it is that you do in order to buy into you, right? Next thing is that use simple language, right? So if you ever hear him speak and look at the documentary, um, he speak like right here, he speaks very slowly to the rural Peruvians, compared to, let's say, like when he's talking on the news, or just see a typical news caster in Spanish. They speak very very fast, but here he's just using very simple language, honor, technology, work, a president like you. And I know I've gotten compliments from people like, hey, when you explain velocity banking, you explain it in such simple terms that I think you're the only one who I understand that I get it from, because it's so simple, right? So use simple language. Don't overcomplicate everything. And sometimes if we just kind of use that simple language over and over again, that will build that emotional bridge with the audience, right? I think sometimes what happens is, out of insecurity, people think that they have to overcomplicate and over-explain things in order to build that bridge with the audience. But simple language is the best language, right? Honor technology and work, and I'm a president like you. Right? And the other thing too, and this is really, I think this is really important, is that your marketing campaigns don't have to be expensive or sophisticated. I think too many times people get oversold tools that don't help them because they haven't developed the skills to use those tools, right? There's so many marketing programs and softwares out there, but if you don't know how to just speak and connect with people, those programs are quite useless, right? So, it's kind of like having a phone. The phone itself doesn't make you a good communicator. It's what you did and what you practiced before you use the phone to call somebody. Okay, and again, and a good example of this is that Fujimobile, where if we scroll up here, basically, this is his campaigning device to introduce himself to the different towns and developing cities in Peru. Like, it's just a farm tractor, right? So, uh, and how is this relevant to this channel? Well, the what I'm trying to what I guess the way I'm trying to say it's related to this channel is that I don't spend any time or effort with any expensive marketing gimmicks. I literally just speak into a microphone. That's it. And that's essentially my quote Fujimobile, which is just me making a Canva thumbnail and then me speaking on a mic and not even doing any sort of editing because I'm too lazy to do that, right? But in general, your marketing campaigns, you just have to reach out to the people. You don't have to make it that fancy or special, right? And one of the last things that I kind of have got as a takeaway, it probably is much easier to connect as an outsider because you're not a prophet in your hometown, right? I've talked about this many, many times, but I think just because, I mean, this guy is essentially an outsider for some reason. I don't know what it is. Maybe about something about human psychology. We just revere outsiders more than the people who we've grown up with, right? I mean, it says that many times um, in the Bible. You see many historical examples of this. I talked about this with the guy who went to Japan and basically revolutionized the manufacturing process, W. Edward Deming. Um, but I just think it's a lot easier to connect if you're an outsider than if you were from, especially with your hometown. I think that's the audience that, for some reason, I just cannot connect with. Even though ironically, the people who watch this channel the most are from California, right? I know this from YouTube analytics. But these are some, I think, mind blowing takeaways into context of marketing that when I see this presidential campaign. So think about this. It's like me. Maybe I'm going to run for governor in Alabama or like the South here in Georgia, and then I go to all like the rural counties, and then I start to I don't even know what traditional Southern wear is. It's not like we're wearing the outfits from the 1800s and having duels, but you know maybe outfits that would kind of connect with the rural population, building that emotional bridge, saying, "Hey, I'm just like you. I did not have relations with that woman." No, I'm just kidding. Um, but I'm just like you. I understand the difficulties that you're facing, even though I'm totally a city boy from California, or actually a suburb boy from California. And then me being applauded and just using simple language over and over again to connect with the audience, right? But in understanding that my marketing campaign or outreach does not have to be super elaborate, sophisticated, or expensive. Okay. And the reason that I think this channel works in many ways is because I am an outsider to a lot of people, and the people who watch this channel, again, this is just me, my assumptions, are not Korean, are not from Atlanta, right? But they're seeking guidance, some sort of guidance or mentorship. Okay. But so again, really mind blowing, and the reason I say it's mind blowing is because if I had not seen these pictures or documentary, and someone said, "Hey, this is possible," I would just say GTFO, right? Get the F out. Like, what are you talking about? But again, I don't know too much about this guy because I'm not from Peru. I'm not Japanese. But when I saw this, I was like, wow, this is really amazing. Like, how'd you do that? Right? And I see that I see kind of like a lack of curiosity with other Asian Americans because again, they start at the conclusion about how something's not possible and they just don't try. And I say that this behavior is not limited just to Asian Americans. I think a lot of people like that. They start off at the conclusion, say something's not possible, and even if they see evidence that it is possible, they just start at the conclusion, say it's not possible. Right? All right. Well, this is Korean Atlanta Mentorship. Hopefully, all this made sense. Again, never been to Peru. Uh, I think it would have been an interesting time to maybe visit in the 1980s when you see all of these problems that are nowhere near anything that we're experiencing. But I think because people, I don't know if I want to say that they're weak. I mean, people just adjust to the relative difficulties in their life. So maybe we have like 7 to 8% inflation, but we got nothing compared to 7,600% hyperinflation, right? But again, aside from the politics, I think this is an incredible marketing lesson of what is possible. And sometimes people think, oh, I'm not able to connect with that person because they're not like me. And I would actually argue you'll have a much better chance of connecting with that person because you are an outsider and you are not like them, right? And you can make an argument for everything, right? All right. Well, this is Korean Atlanta Mentorship. If you have the time, watch the documentary Fall of Fujimori. Very interesting. I think he went into jail and then he got recently released, and he looks very frail after his time in prison, but very interesting. Okay, well, have a great day, everybody, and we'll speak next time.